Good evening, everybody. So, we have discussed about east flowing peninsular rivers. Now, let us discuss about the west flowing rivers of the peninsular India. Okay. So, as we have discussed, this session will be at 10:30 tomorrow, 10:30 tomorrow morning, and I will be covering most of the syllabus tomorrow. Like I'll be taking two sessions, guys, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and I'll be covering off most of the syllabus tomorrow. And the leftover small parts will be completed on Monday. Okay. So, west flowing rivers of peninsular India. The west flowing rivers of peninsular India are fewer in number and also smaller as compared to their east flowing counterparts. So, the number of west flowing rivers in peninsular India are small, very low in number. And not only that, these rivers are also smaller compared to the east flowing rivers. For example, we have Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri, we also have Mahanadi. All these are very, very large rivers, right? So, compared to those rivers, the west flowing rivers are smaller. The drainage basins are smaller. The two major west flowing rivers are the Narmada and the Tapi. But apart from these two, we'll also discuss about the Sabarmati river. Okay? So, this exceptional behavior is because these rivers did not form valleys and instead flow through Rift Valley, created due to bending of the northern peninsula during the formation of Himalayas. So, most of the rivers flow into Bay of Bengal. Then why these rivers flow into Arabian Sea? Why this exceptional behavior? The reason behind this exceptional behavior is these rivers flow through Rift Valley. What is the meaning of Rift Valley? So this is a horst and this is a graben. Okay, so just imagine that there is another host here. So this middle part is Rift Valley, as simple as that. So Narmada and Tapi flow through Rift Valleys, so they don't have any freedom to change their course. So they simply flow into Arabian Sea. Now, how did this Rift Valley come into existence in the first place? The Rift Valley was created due to bending of the northern peninsula during the formation of Himalayas. So when Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate and when Indian plate started subducting under the Eurasian plate, there was some bending in the northern peninsular part, due to which rift valleys were formed. In these rift valleys, Narmada and Tapi flow. As simple as that. So both Narmada and Tapi flow in rift valleys. Not only Narmada and Tapi, there is also one more river called Mahi river. Even Mahi flows through rift valleys. Even Mahi is a west flowing river. Clear, right? So, the Rift Valley runs parallel to the Vindhyas and Satpuras. The Rift Valleys through which Narmada and Tapi flow, the Rift Valley runs parallel to the Vindhyas and Satpuras. Clear, right? So, I hope you are getting all these. The Sabarmati, Mahi and Luni. Luni is like an exotic desert river. Luni flows through Thar Desert of Rajasthan. Okay. Sabarmati, Mahi and Luni are the other rivers of the peninsular India which flow westwards into the Arabian Sea. And apart from these, hundreds of small streams originating in the Western Ghats flow westwards and join the Arabian Sea. Okay. So, Western Ghats are like this. The monsoon carrying winds, they come and intercept Western Ghats. So there is a lot of rainfall here. So many streams, some hundreds and even thousands of small streams, they originate in the Western Ghats and they flow into the Arabian Sea. Okay. Now, The peninsular rivers which fall into the Arabian Sea do not form deltas. Now, this is very, very important. So, such kind of things are favorites of UPSC. Okay, the peninsular rivers which fall into Arabian Sea do not form deltas. There are estuaries, Narmada estuary, Tapi estuary, Sabarmati estuary, estuaries are there. But in that estuary, we don't find delta. But that is not the case with the eastward flowing rivers, right? For example, Mahanadi, okay, Brahmani, and then Krishna, Godavari, Kaveri. We have just discussed a while back that all these rivers form very significant large deltas. Okay, but the peninsular rivers that fall into Arabian Sea, they do not form any deltas. Why? What is the reason? This is due to the fact that the west flowing rivers, especially the Narmada and Tapi, flow through hard rocks and they do not carry any good amount of silt. These rocks are very hard rocks. These are very difficult to erode. The rocks are being eroded, but the rate of erosion is very small. That is the main thing you have to understand here. These are all hard rocks, very difficult to erode. These are not soft, easily erodible rocks. Okay, so the rate of erosion is very small. And the tributaries that flow into these rivers are also very small streams. Okay, and even they do not carry large amount of silt. So these reasons combined together, the peninsular rivers that fall into Arabian Sea do not form deltas. As simple as that. So just look at this point first. This is due to the fact that west flowing rivers, especially the Narmada and Tapi, flow through hard rocks and do not carry any good amount of silt. Next, the tributaries of these rivers are very small and hence they do not contribute any silt. Hence, these rivers are not able to form distributaries or a delta before they enter the sea. Okay, so I hope you understood this. So did you understand this, guys? Please respond. So basically the westward flowing rivers are different and the eastward flowing rivers are different. First thing, the westward flowing rivers flow to the Arabian Sea because they flow through rift valleys, Narmada, Tapi and Mahi. Okay. Now, the second thing you have to keep in mind, the differences between westward and eastward. Westward flowing rivers are few in number and also these are small rivers. They don't have very vast and large drainage basins like the eastward flowing rivers. The eastward flowing rivers, they have very large drainage basins. For example, just look at the drainage basin of Godavari, Krishna and Kaveri, very, very large. And apart from that, the westward flowing rivers, they do not form any deltas. They have estuaries, mouth of the river, but they do not form any delta at the estuary. See, deltas are not formed everywhere, right? For the formation of delta, estuary is a required condition. If estuary is not there, if there is open coast, then the sea waves will wash away all the sediments and the delta is not formed there. So for the formation of delta, we need estuary. So the peninsular rivers that fall into Arabian Sea, they form estuaries, they have estuaries, but they do not form deltas. Okay. So why? What is the reason? Very simple. They don't carry much silt. So what is the reason? Why are they not carrying much amount of silt? So first, Narmada and Tapi, they flow through hard rocks. That means erosion is there, but the rate of erosion is very small. It is not like Himalayan rivers which are coming down from Himalayas with a very steep gradient, eroding Himalayas a lot. It is not like that. Okay. So these rivers are flowing through hard rocks. So they are eroded, but the rate of erosion is very small. So the amount of silt carried by Narmada and Tapi is very small. And not only that, first of all, Narmada and Tapi have very few tributaries. I'll show you the tributaries also, just don't worry about that. So Narmada and Tapi have very few tributaries and even these tributaries are small streams. Even they do not carry a large quantity of silt. Okay. So that is the reason they don't form distributaries or a delta. What do you mean by distributaries? So before the river falls into the sea, the main river stream is split into many branches, right? So why is the main river stream getting split up into multiple branches? Due to deposition of silt. Okay. So that is the reason these rivers, they do not form any distributaries or delta. As simple as that. Now, let us first speak about the Narmada River. Okay. So Narmada is the largest west flowing river of the peninsular India. Okay. Now, Narmada flows westwards through a rift valley between the Vindhyan range on the north and the Satpura range on the south. Okay. Now, previously I've shown you an image. So there are two hosts. There is a graben. These hosts are nothing but Vindhyas and Satpuras. In the middle, there is Rift Valley. Through that Rift Valley, Narmada flows. Okay. So Narmada flows westwards through a rift valley between the Vindhyan range on the north and the Satpura range on the south. Basically, there are two hosts. This is a host and this is also a host, and this is a graben. Graben is Rift Valley. The northward host is Vindhya range. The southward host is Satpura range. So we have discussed this point before. Where does Narmada river rise? The Narmada river's origin is Maikal range near Amarkantak plateau in Madhya Pradesh at an elevation of about 1057 meters. Okay. Now, Narmada basin extends over the states of Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh, having an area of 1 lakh square kilometers. So the entire area of Narmada drainage basin is 1 lakh square kilometers. It flows through many states, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh. Okay. Clear, right? So again, I'm discussing about the Narmada basin. I'm not discussing about the main Narmada river. The main Narmada river will not touch Chhattisgarh, but the tributaries that are, part of the Narmada basin that flow into Narmada, they touch all these states. I hope you understood. Now, the Narmada basin is bounded by the Vindhyas on the north, Maikal range on the east, Satpuras to the south, and Arabian Sea on the west. Clear, right? Now, what is the total length from its source in Amarkantak to its estuary in Gulf of Khambat? The total length is 1310 kilometers. So it's really a major river. Okay. Now, the hilly regions are in the upper part of the basin, and lower middle reaches are broad and fertile areas well suited for cultivation. Okay. The upper parts of the basin. What do you mean by upper parts of the basin? Parts of Narmada basin that are far away from the sea. Lower and middle reaches. What do you mean by that? These parts of the drainage basin are closer to the sea. So, upper parts of the basin are hilly regions and we cannot carry out cultivation there. Most of these areas are covered with thick forest. But the lower and middle reaches are broad and fertile areas. So, here cultivation is carried out on a large scale. Jabalpur in Madhya Pradesh is the only important urban center in the basin. And the Narmada is navigable up to 112 kilometers from its mouth. Clear, right? So I hope you understood all these points about Narmada. Actually, we have discussed all these points before. Okay. Now, tributaries of Narmada. Since the river flows through a narrow valley confined by the hills, it does not have many tributaries. Okay, it is not like the other eastward flowing rivers of peninsula. They all have many tributaries, some hundreds of small streams also, which we did not speak about. But Narmada is not like that. Okay, Narmada flows through a rift valley confined by hills on the both sides. Okay, so that is the reason Narmada does not have many tributaries. The absence of tributaries is especially noted on the right bank of the river, where Hiran is the only exception. Okay, so Hiran is a river that is a right bank tributary to Narmada. And apart from Hiran, there are some small streams which join Narmada from the right bank. That's it. Okay. And apart from Hiran, there are no major rivers that are right bank tributaries of Narmada. As a whole, Narmada does not have many tributaries because it is flowing through Rift Valley, confined by hills on both the sides. That is the first thing you have to keep in mind. Now, the second thing, absence of tributaries is especially noted on the right bank of the river, where Hiran is the only exception. And apart from Hiran, there are some small streams that flow into Narmada from the right bank. That's it. Okay, these are not major ones, these are small minor streams. So, right bank tributaries of Narmada are virtually absent, with the exception of Hiran. A few left bank tributaries drain the northern slopes of the Satpura range and join Narmada at different places. Okay, so from the left bank, see Narmada is flowing towards this direction, right? So this will be left bank and this will be right bank for Narmada. It all depends on the direction of flow. Now Narmada is flowing towards the west. So this is left bank and this is right bank. Okay. Now left bank, we have Satpura range, right? So whenever there is rainfall on Satpuras, few streams, they flow into Narmada. That's it. A few left bank tributaries drain the northern slopes of Satpura range and join Narmada at different places. Apart from that, no more tributaries. So Narmada is known as lifeline of Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat. And this part here is known as Gulf of Khambat or Gulf of Cambay. Okay, Narmada and Tapi, they fall into Gulf of Cambay. Clear, right? So I hope you understood Narmada. Actually, there is nothing here to understand, but there is a lot of information here, a lot of data which you must remember. Okay. The entire Indian geography is like this, mostly memory based. And again, we cannot help it, right? It is very important from exam perspective. So just try to remember Hiran. That is enough. You don't have to remember all this Orsang, Barna, Kolar. You don't have to remember all these. All these are minor streams. That's it. But Hiran is a river basically, not a very large river, normal river. And Hiran is the only main tributary that enters Narmada from the right bank. That is from the north. Okay. Now, next, let us speak about the Tapti river or Tapi river. Tapti or Tapi. The Tapti is the second largest west flowing river of the peninsular India. Second largest after Narmada. And is known as the twin of Narmada. Okay. Now, both are flowing towards the west. Both fall into Arabian Sea. And both are flowing through rift valleys. Okay, so it is also called twin of Narmada. It originates near Multai Reserve Forest in Satpura range in Madhya Pradesh at an elevation of 752 meters. And it flows for about 724 kilometers before outfalling into the Arabian Sea through the Gulf of Cambay or Gulf of Kambat. I told you right, both Narmada and Tapi fall into Gulf of Cambay. Everything is same about Narmada and Tapi. It's just that Narmada is larger than Tapi. That's it. The Tapti river, along with its tributaries, flows over the plains of Vidarbha, Khandesh, and Gujarat. Try to locate all these regions on map. Okay, so if you just Google, you'll get areas that are occupied by Vidarbha region, areas that fall under Khandesh region. So the Tapti river, along with its tributaries, flows over the plains of Vidarbha, Khandesh, and Gujarat, and over large areas in the state of Maharashtra and a small area in Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat. Clear, right? So basically, Tapti, along with its tributaries, flows over the plains of Vidarbha, Khandesh, and Gujarat. So basically, the Tapti river basin is spread over large areas in the state of Maharashtra and a small area in Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat. The basin extends over the states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Gujarat, having a total area of 65,000 square kilometers. The total area of Tapti river basin. Okay. See, you can see two blue lines here, right? The top blue line is Narmada and the bottom blue line is Tapti. Okay. So this should explain everything. Now, situated in the Deccan Plateau, the Tapti basin is bounded by the Satpura range on the north, Mahadev Hills on the east, Ajanta range and Satmala Hills on the south, and by Arabian Sea on the west. Okay, we have discussed about Satmala Hills in the previous session. So don't worry guys, I completely understand that there are so many names here, so many names, so many places, so much factual data. So it is going to scare anybody. I can absolutely understand that because even I went through the same stages. But there is no option here. Okay, all you have to do is just revise this once or twice before going to exam. Like if you write the exam once, then you'll understand the importance of revision. But I don't want you to face that. I want everybody to crack this exam on the first attempt. So please listen to me, revise this once or twice and try to maintain your own running notes because going through this entire thing before exam is very scary. It is very tedious and nobody can do that. So if you have your own running notes with bullet points, arrow marks, flow charts, tree diagrams, you can easily revise that before going to exam and that will only increase your confidence. That is the reason I always stress on running notes. But again, ultimately it's up to you. Okay. So the Tapti river basin is situated on the Deccan Plateau and it is bounded by Satpura range. This is the Satpura range. Satpura range to the north, Mahadev Hills to the east, Ajanta range and Satmala range to the south, and Arabian Sea on the west. Clear, right? The hilly region of the basin is well forested, while the plains are broad and fertile areas suitable for cultivation. So same like Narmada. Okay, the hilly regions are forested, but the plain regions towards the sea are fertile and suitable for cultivation. Clear, right? Kusum, I just told you my secret, right? My secret is revision. That is the secret of everybody, basically. And that is what even the toppers say, right? Revision. Repeated revision. That is very, very important. So all you have to do is just revise. That's it. There is no secret actually. So basically, Tapti river basin extends over the states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra and Gujarat. 3 states. Now, it is spread over large areas of Maharashtra and small areas in Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat. Okay, Tapti river basin, the maximum river basin, is present in the state of Maharashtra and some small parts are also present in Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. Clear, right? So does Tapti have any tributaries? Okay, it has few tributaries, but there's no point in discussing that. All these are like very small streams. And I'm pretty sure that they won't be asked for any exam, not only civils, any exam. So that is about Tapti River. Okay. So what should you keep in mind? You should keep in mind the location of the drainage basin. Location of Tapti drainage basin, Deccan Plateau, bounded by Satpura Range on the north, Mahadev Hills on the east, Ajanta Range and Satmala Hills to the south, and Arabian Sea on the west. Now, in the same way, let us revise drainage basin of Narmada. The drainage basin of Narmada is bounded by Vindhyas on the north, Maikal Range on the east, Satpuras on the south, and Arabian Sea on the west. Okay, so it is like this. First, you have the Vindhya Range. Okay, then you have Narmada River. Then you have Satpuras. Then you have Tapti. Okay, so Narmada is present between Vindhyas and Satpura. Clear, right? So the Narmada River basin is bounded by Vindhyas on the north, Maikal Range on the east, Satpuras on the south, and Arabian Sea on the west. Okay, both Narmada and Tapti, they flow through Rift Valley. Not only these two, even the river Mahi flows through Rift Valley. Clear, right? And also please keep in mind the origin of Narmada. What is the origin of Narmada? Maikal Range near Amarkantak Plateau. Okay. Now, what is the origin of Tapti? Multai Reserve Forest, which is part of Satpura Range in Madhya Pradesh. Clear, right? And both Narmada and Tapti fall into Gulf of Kambat. Everything is similar about them. Narmada and Tapti, everything is like very, very similar. That is the reason Tapti is called the twin of Narmada. As simple as that. Okay, guys. Now, moving on, Sabarmati River. The Sabarmati is the name given to the combined streams of Sabar and Hatmati. Okay. So basically there are two streams, Sabar and Hatmati. Combine them together, you get Sabarmati River. The Sabarmati basin extends over the states of Rajasthan and Gujarat, having an area of 21,674 square kilometers. So comparatively a smaller river. Now again, location of Sabarmati basin, very important. The basin is bounded by Aravalli Hills on the north and northeast. Okay, towards the north and northeast, you have Aravalli Hills. Run of Kutch on the west. Towards the west, you have Run of Kutch. And Gulf of Kambat to the south. To the south, we have Gulf of Kambat. So in the middle, there is Sabarmati River basin. Clear? So the basin is bounded by Aravalli Hills on the north and northeast, Run of Kutch on the west, Gulf of Kambat on the south. I'll show you the map anyway, don't worry. Sabarmati originates from the Aravalli Hills at an elevation of 762 meters near village Tepur in Udaipur district of Rajasthan. Clear? Now, do you remember Gandhiji's ashramam situated along the banks of Sabarmati River? Now, the total length of the river from origin to outfall in Arabian Sea is 371 kilometers. So, comparatively smaller river. The major part of the basin is covered with agricultural lands, amounting to 74.68% of the total area. So, almost 75% of the total area of Sabarmati River Basin occupied by agricultural lands. Now guys, just look at this, all your doubts will be cleared. So, Narmada, Tapi, Mahi, Sabarmati and Luni. I told you, right, Luni is a desert river, but we are not going to discuss about Luni here. So this image will clear all your doubts. Clear, right? So these three rivers are enough, guys. Tapi, Narmada, and Sabarmati. Okay, and you don't have to know about Mahi and Luni, but if at all you're interested, then you can dig some information about them. You'll understand everything. So from my side, I explained Sabarmati, Narmada, and Tapi, the three most important west flowing rivers. Okay, but sometimes even Luni or Mahi can be asked by UPSC. So try to dig some information and you try to make your own notes about Luni and Mahi. That will really help you to remember that forever. Now, all the notes, whatever I'm sharing with you, I prepared that on my own. Okay, it took a lot of time, of course, but it's completely worth it. If you struggle, you'll remember. If somebody spoon feeds you, you won't remember. 100% sure. Now, I struggled a lot to make all these notes. I compiled these notes from many sources because we don't have any perfect source for geography and also for environment. There is no one single perfect source. So you have to visit many websites, you have to read many books. That is how I compiled these notes. Okay, since because I struggled, I remember at least 80 to 75% of whatever is present in the notes. Okay, in the same way, you try to get some information about Luni and Mahi, and you try to write 3 or 4 points about each river in your notes. That will really help you a lot. Guys, it is stuck for me, it is stuck for you also. Okay, Praveen. Rivers are helping in groundwater recharge. Yes. Okay, because we have discussed about uh, an area called floodplain, right? What do you mean by floodplain? Okay, for example, if this is the river, then the surrounding area is called floodplain. Okay, so floodplains have very high groundwater levels. The water table is very high because whenever there is flood, the flood water will spread across this area and that will help in increasing the groundwater levels. Okay. So with this, we are done with the concept of drainage basin. It was a very big chapter, right? It took a lot of time. I guess it took around 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours to complete of drainage basin because we went very extensively, very in depth. Okay. So now let me just start new chapter that is soils. Okay. So let us follow the sequence. First, we'll discuss soils and then agriculture and then monsoon mechanism. And then as part of this chapter only, we'll discuss the other climatic zones of India. And then we'll move on to economic geography. Okay. So let me just start a new chapter now, soils. And after that, we'll move on to agriculture. And as I told you before, tomorrow I'm going to cover a bulk of the syllabus, a vast part of the syllabus. Because this drainage system is a chapter where I cannot go fast. Okay, it is going to take a lot of time because I have to repeat everything once or twice. I have to keep showing you images. I have to give you some time to go through the image, to understand whatever is written on the screen. Okay, so I cannot go fast for this drainage chapter. But the rest of the chapters are more or less very factual, even more factual than this, except the monsoon mechanism, of course. So I'm going to cover a bulk of syllabus tomorrow. So guys, kindly attend the class tomorrow. Try to watch live, okay, and try to make the class interactive. Ask me doubts and let me respond back to your doubts. That is how we can make the subject even more interesting. Okay. So, major soil types of India. Now, geologically, Indian soils can broadly be divided into soils of peninsular India and soils of extra peninsular India. What do you mean by extra peninsular India? The part of India that is outside the peninsular region. As simple as that. Now, what is the difference between soils of peninsular India and soils of extra peninsular India? Soils of extra peninsular India have been deposited into that area. But soils of peninsular India were not deposited from elsewhere. I hope you're understanding. Now, the Himalayan rivers. We all know that the Himalayan rivers carry a lot of silt and sediments from the Himalayas. So the Himalayan rivers will erode the mountains and then carry all that silt and sediments, and that is being deposited in the extra peninsular area. Okay, so the soils of extra peninsular India are transported soils. But that is not the case for peninsular India. Okay, soils of peninsular India are formed in situ. What do you mean by in situ? For example, there is a rock here, the rock got decomposed, the rock got weathered, and at the same place there is soil now. That is the meaning of in situ. Okay, so the soils of peninsular India are formed by the decomposition of rocks in situ. That means directly from the underlying rock. There used to be a rock here that got weathered. Now in the place of rock there is soil. Soil is formed at the same place here. Okay. Now we also have rivers in the peninsular region. So won't these soils be transported? Yes, these soils will also be transported. But the transportation is very less compared to the extra peninsular part of India. Okay. So some of these soils are transported and redeposited, but to a limited extent. I hope you're understanding. So soils of peninsular India are called sedentary soils. They don't move much. Clear? Soils of the extra peninsular part are formed due to depositional work of rivers and wind. Okay? Himalayan rivers, they carry out depositional work. That is how the Great Plain of India has formed. Okay? Now, these soils are very deep. Do you remember while discussing about the Great Plain, we have discussed that the depth of alluvium varies from place to place, but the average depth is somewhere between 1300 meters to 1800 meters or 1500 meters to 1800 meters. So these soils are very deep. Okay, and they are often referred to as transported or azonal soils. Clear, right? So very simple, guys. When you speak about the extra peninsular part of India, then the soils are transported. Transported from where? Transported from the Himalayan mountains. The Himalayan mountains, while flowing through the mountains, they erode the mountains and they carry all those sediments and silt, and they deposited all that over the depression. There used to be a depression there. That got filled up. And now we have the Great Plain of Northern India. Okay. So there the soil is transported soil. But when you speak about peninsular India, there is no transportation here. There is a rock. That rock got decomposed, and now in the place of that rock we have soil. So soil formed at the same place where the rock used to exist before. Clear? And even in the peninsular region, there's going to be some transportation. I'm not denying that. Yes, there's going to be some transportation and deposition. But that only happens for a limited extent. Okay. It is not like the extra peninsular part of India. Clear, right? So, peninsular soils are also transported and redeposited, but to a limited extent. And soils of peninsular India are called sedentary soils. They don't move much. Okay. And soils of extra peninsular India are called transported or azonal soils. These soils are formed due to the depositional work of Himalayan rivers, right? And the soils are very deep. Just remember the depth of alluvium in the Great Plain. So basically, sedentary soils form in the rock on which they are situated. Okay, sedentary soils form in the rock on which they are situated. For example, you have some soil here. Okay, beneath that there is bedrock. So the bedrock eroded and formed soil. So the soil is situated on the rock. It is not moving anywhere. It is located at the same place. Clear, right? Now, what are the major soil types of India? Alluvial soils, black soils, red soils, laterite and lateritic soils. Actually, this is supposed to be or. Okay, you can call them as laterite or lateritic soils. And next you have forest and mountain soils, arid and desert soils, saline and alkaline soils, and peaty and marshy soils. We have all these different types of soils in India. Okay, and let me just start with the first one, which is your favorite, alluvial soils, which is very well known. Okay, so alluvial soils are formed mainly due to silt deposited by the Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra rivers. We all know this, right? But alluvial soils are also formed in coastal areas. Okay, in coastal regions, also alluvial deposits are formed due to delta formation by rivers. Okay, clear, right? Just think about the eastern coastal plain. Think about Mahanadi, Krishna, Godavari, Kaveri rivers. They carry a lot of silt and they all make large deltas. So in the coastal regions also we find alluvial deposits due to delta formation by rivers. Okay. Now, when you speak about the Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain, rocks of Himalayas form the parent material. Okay, you know the meaning of parent rock or parent material, right? We have discussed about weathering, right? Weathering and soil formation in geomorphology. Just remember that. So when you speak about Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain, rocks of the Himalayas form the parent material. Thus, the parent material of these soils is of transported origin. Okay, or you can think in this way, the inorganic part of these soils is of transported origin because the inorganic part of these soils belongs to Himalayas, which are located far away. And all this inorganic material was transported by rivers and then deposited. So, the inorganic material of these soils is of transported origin. Clear, right? Now, alluvial soils are the largest soil group in India, covering about 15 lakh square kilometers. Just look at this number, 15 lakh square kilometers, or about 46% of the total land area of the country. Okay? And they support more than 40% of India's population. We all know that the Great Plain of Northern India is very thickly populated. Okay, and it provides food for around half of India's population. So, alluvial soils support more than 40% of India's population by providing the most productive agricultural lands. Clear, right? So, this is how alluvial soils look like. Now, characteristics of alluvial soils. These are young and they have weak profiles due to their recent origin. Do you remember the concept of soil profile? What do you mean by soil profile? We have various horizons. Okay, so that layer by layer arrangement of soil, that horizon by horizon arrangement of soil is soil profile. Okay, so soil profile is well developed if the soil is old. Okay, but if the soil is young, then we don't have this proper soil profile. Okay, while discussing soil profile, I told you this point. Now, alluvial soils, these are young. Why are these young? Because in some parts of Indo-Gangetic Plain, there is something called Khadar. What do you mean by Khadar? New alluvium. Every year during floods, a fresh layer of alluvium is deposited. Then do you think that they have these proper soil profile? Absolutely not. So alluvial soils are young and they have weak profiles due to their recent origin. Most of the soil is sandy. Okay, and clay soils are also present. Okay, so alluvial soils can be both sandy as well as clay, but most of the alluvial soils are sandy. Okay, now pebbly and gravelly soils are rare. Do you remember we spoke about Bhabur belt? Okay, Bhabur belt is an example of pebbly and gravelly alluvial soil. What do you mean by pebbly and gravelly? Having large particles, pebbles and gravels. Okay, so Bhabur is an example of pebbly and gravelly soil. But Bhabur is only present at few areas. Okay, it's a thin strip. That's it. Now, alluvial soil is porous. What do you mean by porous? It can absorb a lot of water. It can take in a lot of water. So, alluvial soil is porous because of its loamy nature. What do you mean by loamy nature? Equal proportion of sand and clay. Okay. Do you remember we spoke about loamy soils and then we came to the conclusion that loamy soils are the best suitable soils for agriculture? So what do you mean by loamy? Just watch that video where we have discussed different types of soils in geomorphology. You'll understand everything. Okay. Now, porosity and texture provide good drainage and other conditions favorable for agriculture. Alluvial soils are porous because they contain a lot of sand, and texture provide good drainage and other conditions favorable for agriculture. Next, these soils are constantly replenished by recurrent floods. I told you Khadar, right? Praveen, what is your question? Base material or whole? I did not understand your question because I came much further. So please just type in the full sentence. Now, chemical properties of alluvial soils. Okay, so actually we don't need this much. I just wanted to show you that it is going to be like this. That's the reason I included this. But to be honest, we don't need this much. Okay, but anyway, let us just go through this. And for the rest of the soils, we don't analyze the chemical composition. It used to be asked by UPSC once upon a time, but it is no longer asked. Okay, I just included this here as a sample, saying that we don't need this. Okay, but anyway, let us just go through this. The proportion of nitrogen is generally low. The proportion of potash, phosphoric acid, and alkalis are adequate. The proportion of iron oxide and lime vary widely. So, what did you understand by this? Nothing. That is the reason we don't need this. Okay. Now, for the rest of the soils, we are not going to discuss the chemical properties. But while discussing agriculture, I'm going to discuss about the micronutrients and macronutrients required for the crops. Okay. But we are not going to discuss the chemical composition of the soils. It is not required for us. I hope you're understanding. Okay. So I just included this as a sample to show to you that we don't need this. Now, distribution of alluvial soils in India. We all know this, right? Where do we find alluvial soils? Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain and also the coastal plains. That's it. And apart from these, we also have alluvial soil in some places of Gujarat and the neighboring areas also. Okay, we'll discuss about that, don't worry. Distribution of alluvial soils in India. They occur all along the Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plains, except in few places where the top layer is covered by desert sand. Okay, so this Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain extends far into Rajasthan. But we all know that parts of Rajasthan are covered by sand, right? So that is the reason the alluvial soil occurs all along the Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain, except in few places where the top layer is covered by desert sand. Okay. Now, they also occur in the deltas of the Mahanadi, Godavari, Krishna, and Kaveri, where they are called deltaic alluvium or coastal alluvium. Simple, right? Now, some alluvial soils are found in the Narmada, Tapi valleys and also northern parts of Gujarat. But again, these alluvial soils are very poorly developed and they cover very small areas, very small areas. They are just found here and there, scattered here and there. And the amount of area they cover is very small. Okay. So, I hope you understood this. Distribution of alluvial soil in India. Very easy, right? Now, we all know that alluvial soils are very suitable for agriculture. Okay. Now, what are the various crops that are grown on alluvial soils in India? So, first, these soils are best suited for agriculture. We all know this. Next, they are best suited to irrigation also. Okay. So, what do you mean by this? For example, you have black soil. Now, if you intensely irrigate black soil, it will swell like a balloon. Yes, it really happens. Black soil will swell, it will bulge like a balloon. And then it becomes very sticky, very, messy. It becomes too difficult to plow. It becomes too difficult to carry out cultivation. In the black soil, which is very wet, it becomes completely sticky. You cannot really, plow the soil properly. But alluvial soil is not like that. Okay, so these are best suited for irrigation. Next, they produce good harvests of rice, wheat, sugarcane, tobacco, cotton, jute, maize, oilseeds, vegetables, and fruits. So basically, with proper irrigation, proper fertilizers, because just to get this point, the proportion of nitrogen is generally low in alluvial soils. So we have to use nitrogenous fertilizers. That is mandatory. Actually, nitrogenous fertilizers are mandatory for all types of soil, not only alluvial. Okay. Or if you don't want to go for nitrogenous fertilizers, we already know the alternatives. What is that? Sustainable agricultural practices. So basically have fertilizers ready with you and irrigation ready with you. You can cultivate any type of crop in alluvial soils. As simple as that. Clear, right? Now, let us move on to black soils. The parent material for black soil is the volcanic rocks that were formed in the Deccan Plateau, especially the Deccan Trap region. Do you remember we have discussed about the Deccan Trap region? So Deccan Trap region is spread over a large area and it is minimum 2000 meters thick. Okay. Deccan Trap region is made up of many sheets of basalt. So when these basalt sheets get weathered, you get black soil. As simple as that. Now in Tamil Nadu, also black soil is present, but there black soil is formed from gneisses and schists. And these are the parent materials for black soil in Tamil Nadu. Even these are igneous rocks, right? Now, black soils formed in Deccan Trap region are sufficiently deep, while black soils formed in Tamil Nadu out of gneisses and schists are shallow. Okay, So that is one thing you have to keep in mind. Now, these regions are the regions of high temperature and low rainfall. Deccan Trap region and Tamil Nadu, all these are the regions of high temperature and low rainfall. Yes, it is therefore a soil group typical to dry and hot regions of the peninsula. Okay. Do you remember we have discussed about the importance of climate while discussing weathering chapter? We have discussed that climate is the single most important factor of weathering. Do you remember that? Now, climate is very, very important to be discussed here. So, where do you find black soil? Deccan Plateau as well as Tamil Nadu. Okay. So, all these regions have a different type of climate. What is that? It is very hot and it is dry. Dry in the sense it is not a desert. There is rainfall, but only limited rainfall. The rest of the year, dry conditions, drought. So black soil is typical to these areas. Okay. I hope you're understanding. See, climate plays a lot of influence in the formation of soil. Climate also plays a lot of influence in the physical and chemical properties of this soil. So black soil's properties were very greatly influenced by the dry and hot climatic conditions. That is what I wanted to convey. Okay. So this is how black soil looks like. We all know this, right? Black soil. Now, what are the characteristics of black soils? A typical black soil is highly argillaceous. What do you mean by argillaceous? It contains a lot of clay. Okay. A typical black soil contains 62% or more clay. Okay. We know the difference between sand, gravel, silt, and clay, right? It all depends on the particle size. Okay. Just look at this. Sand particle, silt particle, and clay particle. Clay is like the smallest. Okay. Sand 2 to 0.05 millimeters. Silt 0.05 to 0.002 millimeters. And clay less than 0.002 millimeters. So this tiny dot here is clay. Okay. Now, black soil contains a lot of clay, 62% or more. So black soils are highly argillaceous. Okay. Now, in general, black soils of uplands are of low fertility, while those in the valleys and lower elevations are very fertile. Okay. Because uplands, for example, there is black soil on Western Ghats. Just imagine. We all know that there is a lot of rainfall over Western Ghats. So there is lot of leaching of nutrients. And also because these are present on the hilly areas, there is lot of soil erosion also. So that is the reason black soils of uplands are very thin, poor. They don't have much fertility. But the soils that are found in valleys and lower elevations are very fertile. Now, we all know about this, right? Actually, we have discussed different types of soils in geomorphology, right? So, black soil is highly retentive of moisture. Black soil can store a lot of moisture and it swells greatly on accumulating moisture. It bulges like a balloon. A lot of effort is required to work on such soil in rainy season as it becomes very, very sticky. Clear? In summer, the moisture evaporates, the soil shrinks in size, and deep cracks develop on the soil. So actually this is good. This is not a bad thing. This is actually a good thing because when these cracks develop, it will result in oxygenation of the soil. So a lot of oxygen enters into the soil. Okay. So see, in summer the moisture evaporates, soil shrinks, and deep broad cracks develop. But the lower levels can still retain some moisture. And the cracks allow oxygen to enter into the deeper parts of the soil. And then the soil will have great fertility. Okay, because if any organic matter is present at the bottom, that will only be decomposed if there is oxygen. So oxygenation of the soil is very important once in a while. So these cracks will allow a lot of oxygen to go deep, and if there is any accumulation of organic matter, that will be decomposed, adding inorganic nutrients to the soil. Simple, right? Yes, Gautam. Shield volcanic eruption. Okay, what do you mean by shield volcanic eruption? Fissures, cracks, through which there is lava flood. An enormous quantity of lava pours out. And this lava forms sheets of basalt, layer by layer. When this is eroded, you get black soil. As simple as that. And we have discussed about hotspot volcanism, and then we also discussed Deccan Traps region formed due to hotspot volcanism. Okay, so please keep all this in mind. Okay, Praveen, coffee plantation. Yes, coffee plantation can also happen on black soil. Okay, not only cotton, actually many crops are grown. I'm telling you, right, if you have good irrigation, if you have good fertilizers, you can grow any type of crop. It doesn't matter. You can grow any type of crop in any type of soil. Even you can convert desert soil into a fertile soil if you have organic matter, fertilizers, and good amount of irrigation. Okay. Now, color of the black soils. The black color is due to the presence of small proportion of magnetite, which is an ore of iron, and also humus. And again, humus is not present in large quantities. Please don't think that black soils are like soils of wetlands. Absolutely not. Soils of wetlands have enormous quantity of organic matter, but black soils are not like that. Generally, black soils are poor in humus. Again, when I say poor in humus, don't think that humus is absent. Humus is present, but in limited small quantities. Okay, so not only magnetite, even ores of aluminum and other iron ores are also present, which gives the color black. In Tamil Nadu and parts of AP, the black color is derived from crystalline schists and gneisses. Okay, and these are basic. We have discussed about acidic magma, basic magma, acidic igneous rocks, basic igneous rocks. Do you remember? So, even if you don't remember, you have the video access for 1 year, right? 1 or 2 years, right? So just go through that video, different types of rocks, and then read this, you'll understand. Okay? So, I'm hoping that you're understanding all these. Now, black soils. Black soils are spread over 46 lakh square kilometer throughout the country. So, roughly it is 16.6% of the total land area of the country. Black soils are spread over Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, parts of Karnataka, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. Just keep in mind the Deccan Trap region, and also keep in mind Tamil Nadu. That's it. Okay. Now, these soils are best suited for cotton crop. Hence, these soils are called Regur and black cotton soils. Okay, but again, as I told you, when irrigation is available, not only cotton, crops such as wheat, sorghum, and rice can also be grown. Okay, and apart from that, sugarcane. I forgot to mention sugarcane here. Even sugarcane is a very popular crop on these soils. Now, do you remember vertisols? Like while discussing types of soils in geomorphology, I use the term vertisols. So actually, black soils are vertisols. So vertisols are also suitable for rice cultivation because they are almost impermeable when saturated. First of all, do you know that the paddy crop requires a layer of water? Okay, there should always be a layer of water. That is the reason paddy fields are called man-made wetlands. Okay. Now, when black soils are saturated, what do you mean by that? That means black soils absorbed a lot of water, they cannot absorb any more. All the spaces between the soil particles filled with water. So, when black soils become saturated, they almost become impermeable. That means they can easily maintain a layer of water on top of the soil when the black soils get saturated. Okay, so they're also suitable for rice. All you need is irrigation, fertilizers. You can cultivate any crop on any type of soil. But some crops are easily cultivated, some crops are hard work. That is the only difference. Praveen, again, I did not understand your question. I can only answer your questions if you type in the full question. Okay. You should never ask ambiguous questions. Just type in the entire thing. Whatever is there in your mind, type in the entire thing. Okay. So, done with black soils. Now let us move on to red soils. Okay. The main parent rocks are crystalline and metamorphic rocks like granites, gneisses, and quartzites. Actually, granites and gneisses are igneous rocks. Then, how can I call them as metamorphic? Even an igneous rock can become metamorphic rock if it is subjected to a lot of heat and a lot of temperature. Okay, so just imagine that there is an igneous rock on the surface and there is a lava flow. Now we know that the temperature of the lava is very high. So the rock will be exposed to very high temperatures. Its physical and chemical properties will change. Then it becomes metamorphic rocks. Okay. So what are the main parent rocks for red soils? Crystalline and metamorphic rocks like granites, gneisses, and quartzites. Now characteristics of red soils. The texture of these soils can vary from sand to clay, but the majority are loamy soils. And we all know that loamy soils are very suitable for agriculture. Yes. So, on the uplands, like high plateaus or hills, red soils are poor. They are gravelly and porous. Again, the same reason. Just imagine that there is a red soil here present on top of the hill. So if there is heavy rainfall, all the soil will get, carried away along with the streams towards the downslope. So whatever is left behind, that will be gravelly and porous. That means large particles will be there and a lot of open spaces will be there and the soil will be very thin and poor. So on the uplands, red soils are poor, gravelly and porous. But in lower areas, they are rich, deep, dark, and fertile. Clear? Why sugarcane cultivation shifting from north to south India? Do you want textbook answer or do you want the real answer? If you want the textbook answer, I can give you a textbook answer. But if you want the real answer is mafia, sugar mafia. Okay, all the sugar mills in India are owned by politicians and rich people who have very strong political connections. So they have that sugar cartel. What do you mean by cartel? A group of people controlling an industry. That is cartel. So actually it is sugar mafia. So in parts of Karnataka, Maharashtra, a lot of sugarcane is grown. A lot. Okay. And textbook answer, anyway we'll discuss while discussing Indian agriculture. Okay, the real answer is sugar mafia. Okay, so sugarcane is one of the most profitable crops. Okay, because government subsidies are given for sugarcane. So, even though in some places sugarcane cultivation is very bad because there is, less moisture in the soil, groundwater levels are low. In spite of that, people cultivate sugarcane for earning profit. Okay. Just keep one thing in mind. Sugarcane is very water intensive. It consumes a huge amount of water. It needs a lot of water to grow. So sugarcane is not suitable everywhere. Sugarcane is only suitable in those places where there is good amount of soil moisture and where the groundwater levels are high. But in spite of parts of Maharashtra and Karnataka being dry and drought prone, people cultivate sugarcane there because of the high profit, because of this mafia. And first of all, there are dry and drought conditions. Due to cultivation of sugarcane, the conditions become even more severe. Very, very dry conditions. So even though it is ecologically very bad, people still do that for money. Okay. So now, I hope you understood characteristics of red soil. Now, color of red soils. Obviously, presence of iron oxide, same like Mars. So why is Mars red in color? Iron oxide, the same thing with red soils also. Now, distribution of red soils. These soils mostly occur in the regions of low rainfall. They occupy about 3.5 lakh square kilometer or 10.6% of the total area of the country. Okay, now these soils are spread on almost the whole of Tamil Nadu. Okay, except some parts which are covered by black soil, most of the Tamil Nadu contains red soil. Other regions with red soil include parts of Karnataka, southeast Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Chota Nagpur Plateau, parts of South Bihar, West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Aravallis and the eastern parts of Rajasthan and parts of northeastern states. So red soil is distributed very widely across the length and breadth of the country. Okay, but red soil as a whole only occupies 3.5 lakh square kilometers or 10% of the total area of the country. Clear, right? So just remember as much as you can, because ultimately you cannot force yourself to remember all this, right? But again, my suggestion, revise, take running notes, revise, that's it. Nobody can stop you. Now, this is how red soil looks like. You all know this, right? Crops in red soils. The red soils are mostly loamy. Hence, they cannot retain water like black soils. That means, don't think that, they cannot retain water at all. Yes, they can retain water, but not as much as black soils. Okay. And red soils are mostly loamy. And we have discussed that loamy soils are very suitable for agriculture. So red soils with proper use of fertilizers and irrigation techniques give good yield of cotton, wheat, rice, pulses, millets, tobacco, oil seeds, potatoes and fruits. Same, all the soils same. All you need is good irrigation techniques and fertilizers. Okay. And if you're speaking about soils like desert soils, then you need more and more fertilizers and more water. Or if you're talking about alluvial soil, then you only need some nitrogenous fertilizers and a little bit irrigation. It all depends from soil to soil, but literally you can grow crops on any type of soil if you have fertilizers and irrigation. That's it. Like for example, desert soils are there. Okay, there is no organic matter. We can add organic matter. Okay, don't you think we can do that? We can easily do that. We can carry out mulching and we can make a lot of manure with cow dung and all that, and we can put that for desert soil. So any type of soil can be reclaimed. Any type of soil can be made fertile. Next, laterite soils. So after discussing laterite soils, I'll just stop this session because I'm feeling a bit exhausted. And don't worry, tomorrow I'm going to take 2 geography sessions and we are going to cover bulk of geography syllabus. So laterite soils, these are mostly the end products of weathering. Okay, so the partially weathered, unweathered materials that are present in laterite soils. They are formed under the conditions of high temperature and heavy rainfall with alternate wet and dry periods. Okay, during the dry period, severe drought. During the wet period, heavy rainfall. and apart from these two, high temperature. In such climatic regions, you find laterite soils. Please keep one thing in mind. Climate plays a very important role in influencing weathering and also in influencing the physical and chemical properties of soil. So that is the reason you must keep these climatic conditions in mind while discussing about soil. Heavy rainfall promotes leaching. We all know the meaning of leaching, right? All the inorganic nutrients will get dissolved in water, they'll get washed away. So heavy rainfall promotes leaching of soil, whereby lime and silica are leached away and a soil rich in oxides of iron and aluminum compounds is left behind. Okay, so laterite soils mostly are made up of oxides of iron and aluminum compounds like bauxite. Okay, bauxite is aluminum compound. Now, why do we call it as laterite? Laterite means brick in Latin. So when you leave these soils to dry, they become very strong. They become rock hard. So these soils harden greatly on losing moisture. Chemical composition of laterite soils. For this, we have to discuss chemical composition. Laterite soils are rich in bauxite and iron oxides. Okay, because if at all you get any question about bauxite, then immediately laterite soils should come into your mind. That is the reason for laterite soils, we are going to discuss chemical composition. And these are very poor in lime, magnesia, potash, and nitrogen because all these are water soluble. We have discussed, right? Laterite soils, intense leaching of nutrients. Sometimes the phosphate content may be high in the form of iron phosphate. In wetter places, there may be higher content of humus. Okay. In wetter places, there might be thick vegetation due to which, there might be a thicker level of humus. Clear? Very simple, right? So guys, are you understanding all these? Don't worry about the origin of Sharavati river. Okay. Origin for such minor rivers is not important for us. Okay. I asked Sharavati river is tributary of which river? That was the question I asked. Okay. Forget about origin. See, if you keep on discussing about origin, then there are so many streams, so many rivers, so many tributaries. How many origins will you keep in mind? Don't worry about origin. Just tell me Sharavati is tributary of which river? Okay. Praveen, you don't know what is humus? We have discussed about soil profile in geomorphology. Humus is the topmost part of the soil, which is rich in organic matter. As simple as that. Now, crops in laterite soils. Can we carry out agriculture in laterite soils? I don't think so. Because laterite soils lack fertility due to intensive leaching. Okay. But again, as I told you, we can use manure, we can use fertilizers, and with the help of all these things, we can carry out cultivation. But naturally, laterite soils are not suitable for cultivation. But as I told you before, any type of soil can be cultivated. Now, when manured and irrigated, some laterites are suitable for growing plantation crops like tea, coffee, rubber, cinchona, coconut, areca nut, etc. Okay. Now, in some areas, these soils support grazing grounds and scrub forests for cattle and livestock. Okay. Now, distribution of laterite soils. Where are these found in India? Laterite soils cover an area of 2.48 lakh square kilometers. Continuous stretch of laterite soil is found on the summits of Western Ghats at 1000 to 1500 meters above the sea level. Okay, on the summits of Western Ghats, we find a continuous stretch of laterite soil because Western Ghats receive a lot of rainfall because Western Ghats, they intercept the southwest monsoon winds. So there is lot of orographic rainfall here. We have discussed the meaning of orographic rainfall. Okay. And apart from Western Ghats, where else do you find laterite soil? Eastern Ghats, Rajmal Hills, Vindhya and Satpuras, Malwa Plateau. Okay. And laterite soils also occur at lower elevations, in valleys and in several other parts of country. Like these are very scattered here and there. Okay. Now, laterite soils are well developed in South Maharashtra, parts of Karnataka, etc., and are widely scattered in other regions. So I hope you understood this. Sure, Praveen, I'll do that. We have to discuss some more varieties of soil, right? We just have completed alluvial, black, red, and laterite. Okay, we have to like cover the other types of soils also. Okay. So winner, Sharavati is not a tributary of any river. Are you sure about that? Okay. So if this is the question tomorrow in UPSC, Sharavati is tributary of which river? Then what will you answer? Okay. So sometimes trick questions will come. Trick questions. And if you really want to crack this exam, then you should be able to answer trick questions also. Okay. Sometimes trick questions can be very easy, common sense based. Okay. And many situational based questions are coming up in UPSC. Nobody can train you how to answer that. You have to think. See, I can spoon feed all this information into your brain. I'll do that. That is my job. But how can I make you think? That you should do on your own. Okay? Now, economic value of laterite soils. Laterite and lateritic soils, both are same basically. They provide valuable building material. We can make bricks from laterite soil. I told you, right? It hardens a lot. It turns into a stone when you dry it because of the chemical composition, bauxites and iron oxides. That is what is present in laterite soil. So these soils can be easily cut into cakes when they are wet, and then they harden like stone when they are dried. So that is the economic value of laterite soils. Clear, right? So, guys, we are done with today's session. Let us meet tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning. So tomorrow, as I told you, I'll try my best to cover the bulk of geography syllabus. So please try to attend the class live. And also, just in case if your friends have missed this session, just inform them also. Try to put a post in your group. Okay. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. And environment syllabus, I'll finish off on Monday. We have a just 20-30 minute session, that's it. Only one more law. I can easily discuss that. So we are going to finish off environment syllabus on Monday. But tomorrow, 2 sessions, only geography. Okay. So thank you so much for joining me, and let us meet tomorrow morning.